Tortoise released an article and a four-part podcast series about some allegations against Neil Gaiman. I've gone over the first two. This is the third one. And the first two mostly follows Scarlet and her story. In the third episode, they continue with her story a little bit more, go into some childhood of Neil Gaiman, and then they introduce a second woman as well.
The complaint is one she filed more than a year earlier. It centres on that evening in the bath, the first time she'd met Neil Gaiman.
So this is in reference to Scarlet going to the police with her story about Neil Gaiman.
Your explanation in your interview, you've neither said anything to the other person, according to your interview, and neither have you carried out any physical actions that might suggest that you weren't consenting.
Apart from lying there like a freaked out fish. Yeah.
Scarlett's description of lying there like a freaked out fish isn't enough.
It's about our role in protecting the victims from putting them through another trauma in court, where the question marks that I've got only get bigger in court. When a defence lawyer comes on to where I'm at now, a defence lawyer will make you look like you asked for it and everything else. And the reasons why is because there's a question mark, there will be a question mark over what you felt was consent at the time. What I'm saying to you is, in your case with the Gaiman matter, it wouldn't stand up in court, and you would probably come off for the worse if we took this to court.
Alongside the general question that so many people ask of why the police don't seem to pursue allegations of sexual abuse with more zeal, there's a specific one here. How can the police investigate such allegations when there is wider evidence of consent? In other words, is it possible that the man can assume he has consent, the woman believes she has not consented to what he is doing, and the complaint still be properly investigated? Is there still a gap between the protections individuals might expect and the protections the law actually provides?
There were a couple of questions I wanted to ask, if that's okay, just for my own resolution. Have you interviewed Neil or Amanda or anyone?
Neil Gaiman?
Yeah. No, yeah. Or Amanda? Partner? No. Okay.
As explained to you.
Yeah, so the cops are saying they haven't interviewed Neil or his wife, Amanda.
When we spoke, Amanda wasn't present.
Yeah. And anyone else?
No.
Okay.
As I said to you, Scarlet, this is purely based on your interview alone.
Yeah.
The police don't say why they didn't talk to Neil Gaiman. According to his account, they never even asked him for an interview. So, from Neil Gaiman's account, we're told that when he learnt about the allegations against him, he hired a lawyer in New Zealand to offer the police both an interview and a transcript of his messages with Scarlet. But, according to his account, the police advised him the file would be closed. His position is that this reflects a lack of substance in Scarlet's complaint. When we then asked New Zealand police to help us reconcile what they told us with Neil Gaiman's position that he wasn't asked, they added,
"There are a number of factors to take into consideration with this case, including location of all parties."
Meaning Neil Gaiman wasn't in New Zealand, and police forces don't have much power to compel a person to return to a country and cooperate. So was Neil Gaiman's offer of assistance specifically for an interview in person in New Zealand? The police said they couldn't comment. Neil Gaiman's account was that his future travel plans were made known to the police.
Back in the meeting, devastated that the
He just said the police could reach me if they wanted to, but they never did.
police are telling her they won't actively pursue her complaint, Scarlet asks the officers one more question.
I wanted to know if anyone else had come forward, but that's clearly not.
Well, I've taken on board what you said about other people, and I've done an open source search, and I've found nothing that supports that he's up to mischief with other people as well.
Okay. That was sort of what I wanted to know, really. Yeah. I think that's everything. Yeah. Thank you.
She sounds super defeated in the interview. It's kind of hard to listen to.
It might seem like a strange question to have to ask. What other potential crime would require the victim to track down other victims to be believed? We don't ask, but who else did he kill? And disbelieve an allegation of murder simply because the accused hasn't faced previous allegations of murder. One of the ways that prosecutors may seek to prove the case in court is to show a pattern of behavior. Scarlet asks the police if other women have come forward. They tell her they couldn't find anything on the internet. They tell her that, as things stand, they can't pursue her complaint any further. The news devastates her, but she saw it coming. The police had called her months earlier to suggest her complaint might not go forward. That's why, on the 3rd of October 2023, Scarlet turns to journalists.
When I reached out to you, I think it was evident to me that there was nothing that was going to happen. And I can fucking see why people don't do it. because it almost makes it worse. Well, it does make it worse because it's just so invalidating, because it took a lot to sort of galvanize that courage in myself to go to the police and to believe myself enough, to go to the police.
We start searching, not because we have to do the police work ourselves. Journalists rightly don't have the powers of the state to investigate, but because Scarlet gives us another lead. She alleges to us that Neil Gaiman's treatment of her is part of a wider pattern of behaviour, that she's one part of the story.
And that's kind of the main thing that we have to go off of this, because there's not, hard documentation of any of this sort of stuff. So mostly what they hammer home is that he has a pattern of behavior with women here.
It takes months. Months of interviewing people from California to New Zealand, from London to New York, even chasing leads around a sleepy market town in the south of England. We spoke to his friends. One says she's known Neil Gaiman for 12 years. She says that while she's alive to his faults, she doesn't believe him capable of the sexual misconduct alleged against him, that she'd go to the wall for him on this, that she'd be stunned if the allegations were true. This friend also said that, like her, Neil Gaiman has autism. On his social media, he's described autism as both his superpower and his kryptonite. His friend said that his autism may explain what she called some of his mistakes, that it contributes to what she called his naivety. And then we...
And this is like a fully grown man. I'm not going to, say that autism is a non-factor. It doesn't impact your social skills or whatever. Obviously it does, but it's a fully grown man. Like, you have to be able to deal with the cards that you're dealt. You can't fall back on something like that.
Spoke to another woman who's known him for about a decade. A woman who enjoys rough sex and has enjoyed it with him as his on and off lover. She said her experiences with him have been incredible. This friend, in fact, said she has nothing but positive things to say about Neil Gaiman, that he has helped her through hard times and that she loves, respects, and cares about him.
When the Gaimans moved nearby, this place was also the founder of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard's family home. Neil Gaiman...
They spend a lot of time in the podcast going into the Scientology part. I cut most of it out because it didn't seem super relevant. But I mean, it definitely played a big part, and I will play parts of it. But they went into it for quite a while.
His father worked for him. Back in the late 60s, though, things were starting to turn sour. After a spate of lurid stories and negative media attention about the church, exposing the way it allegedly disconnected members from their families, founder L. Ron Hubbard was declared a persona non grata by the British government, and foreign Scientologists were banned from entering the UK.
And then by 1966, 67, it became an issue in Parliament. So that's when David Gaiman, who was, like I said, one of the top 2 or 3 Scientologists in all of England, puts his son out for this.
Yeah, Neil Gaiman's dad, it was like some sort of communications title. He's head of communications or media or PR, something along those lines. And they had their son, Neil Gaiman, at the time do basically this puff propaganda piece to be like, oh, see, look how good Scientology is. It makes small kids, they're already this smart.
Interview with the BBC to show what a talented young Scientologist kid he is.
A document leaked from the Church of Scientology, dated 15 February 1983, says that David Gaiman is a suppressive person. The term is used to describe Scientology's enemies, or people it excommunicated. The document claims that David Gaiman had launched mindless attacks on the British government to grow his status and popularity, and that he bullied staffers into joining these attacks. While behaving in this way, the document claims that David Gaiman presented himself as mild-mannered and quite sociable. The document cites David Gaiman's history of sexual misconduct over many years. Here, the document provides no details of David.
Yeah, so they kind of... I thought they were including this at first to set the groundwork that Neil Gaiman's father was also a very manipulative person, but, they mention this Scientology stuff, and then they kind of go on to say, well, we can't really trust the church.
Gaiman's alleged sexual misconduct. It only cites the formal charge in Scientology.
This is not to suggest any link between David Gaiman's alleged misconduct and his son's alleged misconduct. It's not to say like father, like son, because it's not even clear whether these are trumped-up charges, as Tony Ortega explains.
In Scientology, once you have fallen out of favor, they're going to say anything about you. So I wouldn't rely on that. I would say Scientology made these allegations about him as they kicked him out, but that doesn't mean it happened. I wouldn't trust Scientology with that.
He has said since that he no longer considers himself a member of the Church of Scientology as such. His walking away from Scientology coincides with the start of his writing career, but we don't know if this was the reason. He didn't answer any of our questions about this period of his life.
And there's no doubt playing yourself in a fictional TV show or making it into The Simpsons twice.
Now they're talking about how big and famous he is. He was on The Big Bang Theory.
Is a pretty sure sign you've made it. His reputation had been growing over many years. He's now rich and famous. The Sandman universe is full of LGBTQ characters. It's since spawned a Netflix hit with a budget of millions of dollars per episode. Neil Gaiman is an industry. His other works, Coraline, Good Omens, American Gods, Stardust, and The Ocean at the End of the Lane, have all been made or are being made into TV series or films. The books themselves sell millions of copies around the world. They are a source of enormous revenue for his publishers, including Bloomsbury, HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, and DC Comics.
So basically, I think the significance of this is just that, there's a lot of money in Neil Gaiman not going down and his reputation staying clean. That's more or less the significance.
But it was Sandman that broke the mold, and in doing so, attracted a whole new readership. Women. It was also among the first graphic novels to ever feature on the New York Times bestseller list. There is no suggestion that any of these organizations knew or ought to have known about the allegations against Neil Gaiman in this podcast.
By 2008, Neil Gaiman is living in the US and seeing the feminist rock star icon Amanda Palmer, lead singer of the Dresden Dolls. They marry in 2011. In interviews, they described their marriage as open, with what they called slutty compassion. Neil Gaiman's liberal, progressive image is boosted by this partnership with famous feminist punk performer Amanda.
Sure, we're watching celebrities talk about this, but this is happening to all women everywhere.
Both of them are very vocal on sexual violence against women.
This is just this insidious, cultural sickness that we're hopefully starting to air out.
Neil Gaiman also frequently speaks out and especially tweets in support of women who've suffered at the hands of men.
Just looking back over his tweets, and on Twitter he's got 3 million followers, on the 21st of April 2010, he tweeted it's Sexual Assault Awareness Month and linked to a webpage where people could buy a painting of his wife, Amanda Palmer, to raise money for a sexual abuse charity. And on the 31st of October 2014, he references the hashtag that went viral in that year, and he tweets, reading the "been raped, never reported" hashtag. It's hard reading, makes me slightly ashamed to be human, and much more ashamed to be male.
And it's interesting because that seems specifically kind of to describe, not necessarily rape, but some level of sexual assault or taking, women's autonomy from them on some level and it not being reported. And, he says that he's disgusted by that, maybe a little self-conscious or something like that. That's what it made me think, not proof or anything.
Understand, Neil Gaiman considers any allegation of hypocrisy in this respect to be misguided. His position is that he stands by his prior public statements about sexual violence against women, as well as on the issue of consent, that the statements are compatible with his personal conduct, and that the suggestion these statements are an attempt to conceal any unethical behavior is false. There is another cause that Neil Gaiman has said is close to his heart. He has described himself in a recent New York Times interview as a First Amendment absolutist, the capstone of the American Constitution that protects freedom of speech and the press. When it comes to this podcast, Neil Gaiman's position is that its publication would expose Tortoise to significant legal risk, as he believes it is not based on reporting that's accurate, responsible, and is not in the public interest. We have thought long and hard over 8 months about the public interest in this story. It's one that touches on the intimate lives of various people, not least Neil Gaiman. It's one that, in his PR advisor's words, has implications for everyone involved. So the public interest has to, and in our view does, justify its publication, for many reasons. It was after we researched how New Zealand police handled Scarlet's complaint and how the police appear to have been limited by the law itself. After we examined her allegations of abuse against Neil Gaiman, some of them, if proved, criminal. After we reported on what we were told of the concealment of his alleged behavior, including Scarlet's backdated NDA, Amanda Palmer's reference to 14 others, and the use of the family therapist. And
the NDA is kind of one of the more insidious parts. In a earlier episode, they mentioned that Neil's team sent Scarlet an NDA about working for him as a nanny and not talking about any of that. But it was after she had stopped working for him, and it went back all the way to the first time they had ever met, and not necessarily just time that they'd worked together.
After we understood the laws around consent during rough sex. It was after all this that we came to believe that there was a clear and convincing public interest here, and one supported by a second woman's allegations of similar behavior by Neil Gaiman to that alleged by Scarlet. After weeks of speaking to people in the world of comics, I get a message from someone else who worked in the industry. I had contacted this person asking about sexual misconduct, but without mentioning Neil Gaiman. We agree to speak, and when we do, this person tells me, when I read your message, I thought, if this guy is working on a story about Neil Gaiman, then he's hit the jackpot. The jackpot, it turned out, was that this person once knew a girl who was once a fan of Neil Gaiman. and that almost 2 decades ago, she met him at a book signing.
That's such a murky line, and it's also part of why it's hard for me to talk about, and it's not something that like during the Me Too movement, I was like, well, I don't have a leg to stand on, I don't have like video proof of this, but it didn't happen.
Decade.
And that's Kay speaking. That's the woman who the 4th episode is primarily.
And continents separate Scarlet from this second woman. They've never met or spoken. She was 18 years old when she met Neil Gaiman in the noughties, and the way she talks about her time with him is familiar. Neil Gaiman's position is that the only similarity between her account and Scarlet's is that, in both cases, contemporaneous messages contradict their narratives.
So that's more or less the 3rd episode, and like I said, the 4th episode focuses on Kay's story more so.